All right, hello and welcome. I'm Adam Berezin from msdynamicsworld.com, and thanks so much for joining us for today's event, Navigating the Tech Landscape Around Accounts Payable, which will be presented by Mike Goldenberg and Andrew Waters from MineralTree and Ahmed Nagy, the Financial Controller for the Hollywood Wax Museum. So before we get started, it would be great if you could actually answer two short poll questions, which you'll find on the right-hand side of the screen. And while you're doing that, I'd like to mention that we also invite you to add your feedback and ask questions today during our presentation. You can use the Q&A panel that you see to the right of the window to submit questions to our speakers. The session will also be recorded and we'll post it online within the next few days. So without further delay, I'm going to turn it over to our first presenter, Mike Goldenberg.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We appreciate everyone taking their time. We will try and make this very, to the point and keep it interesting for everyone. Today's topic, we're going to really focus on what is the landscape around accounts payable. And, one of the things that we most commonly hear from our prospects before they become customers and just in general is around all the different types of solutions that in different ways are able to solve the, accounts payable challenges they have. And so certainly, you could, take the time to research it yourself and really dig in and spend a lot of time, but of course, you've probably got a lot of better things to do. So hopefully this will be a quick crash course on, that decision-making process and how to speed that up and give you a better sense of where to start or help you if you're already in the process. So myself, I'll be kind of covering the larger picture stuff. Andrew Waters, our product manager, will dive into some of the specifics of the product, and Ahmed will share some of his experiences and how he went through the process of making a decision on how to automate his accounts payable. So like I said, certainly you could spend a tremendous amount of time and energy looking for different solutions, but a lot of times it is very confusing to understand, how would this fit into my current process, and what parts should I be focusing on, and what types of questions should I be asking? So you could spend the time in the lab yourself, or you could come to a webinar like this and help you get started. So we'll talk about some of the main categories and solutions that are out there, give you a short list of things you should be considering, as well as how those technologies map into your workflow, give you a better sense of how to evaluate solutions, make sure they're the best fit, and of course, like I said, Ahmed will go into the details of how he was able to make his decision. So there's several different categories of solutions, and it can be both confusing as well as overwhelming at times. So just briefly, you have business process outsourcing, sometimes referred to as FAO, financial accounting outsourcing as well. Ultimately, this type of solution is if you are looking to completely take it off your hands. Oftentimes, it is focused more on larger enterprises, things of that nature. If you are interested in really just getting rid of accounts payable altogether and not having anyone in-house, certainly we have several different partners that we can refer you to that will take it completely off your hands. But for a lot of people, they are looking to keep it in-house. They're looking just to improve the way they do it, improve efficiency, security controls, all those things. So the next category, and this is a very wide category, is the procure-to-pay. And so what's interesting about procure-to-pay is this is a type of solution that you may see out in the market that's often focused on really the front end of purchasing, so purchase requisitions, the PO process, budgeting, things of that nature that are really focused on controlling spend and visibility to spend, and less focused on the accounts payable part. What you'll find with a lot of procure-to-pay solutions is that they will take you right up to the payment but not actually do the payment execution itself. And so even in some cases, if you're looking for a really in-depth procure-to-pay solution, it still may make sense to have a payment execution solution on the back end. So for instance, we do find a lot of companies that may have a very in-depth procure-to-pay solution that would still leverage something like MineralTree to actually execute those payments and push back the information to their accounting system. The next solution, document management. Everyone's pretty familiar with that, but what you're tending to see nowadays is that there is some ability to do workflows and approvals and possibly even some OCR technology to capture data within some of these document solutions. That being said, they are highly focused on the documents themselves, and the advantage to a solution like that is obviously you could handle all of your document storage, not just accounts payable with it. However, it is not going to address the end-to-end process of accounts payable all the way from capturing and storing those documents through all the approvals and the payment execution, and is often not integrated with the accounting system. So there are some advantages there, but also not a complete solution typically. The next is just a true bill pay solution. So there's many solutions out there that do this. Again, they're more focused on one part of the process. So they are really just focused on the payment execution and consolidating that in terms of your ACH and checks and possibly credit cards all in one place. But again, that's really just focused on the back end. So in the same way that document management is really just handling the front part, bill pay is just handling the back end. Similar to that would be an integrated payable solution. So if you're working with some of the larger banks, they may offer this ability where you can essentially create a custom file format that is then uploaded to your bank. This is a lot of file transfers, things like that. Again, focus on the back end. Sometimes it's consolidated in terms of the types of payments, sometimes it's not. Sometimes they allow you to give very specific payment instructions, sometimes not. Oftentimes with integrated payables, it's billed on a per transaction basis, but there tends to be a lot of additional fees that it's important to keep an eye on in terms of sometimes you're charged for different file transfers and confirmations and things like that, but it's only handling kind of one piece of the puzzle. The next solution, and this is where MineralTree would fit in, is an invoice-to-pay solution. So it's an end-to-end solution from invoice capture all the way through the payment approvals, or I should say the invoice approval, so making sure that, yes, this is an invoice that should be paid, all the way through the payment approvals, meaning, the CFO or whoever the actual payment authorizer is, and the different levels of payment approval are being met, and then actually executing the payments and pushing all that information back into your accounting system. So that is, where MineralTree would fit into the mix. The next is the accounting system itself, whether you're using GP, which obviously the people on this webinar are primarily using, or any sort of other accounting system. There is some degree of accounts payable, functionality within those solutions, but what most people typically find is that once you start to have a reasonable size of payables, and we typically tend to say 100 or more payments, it does fall short in terms of what the accounting packages offer. Obviously, they cover a wide breadth of solutions, but they only cover, call it 70, 80% of each thing. So when you start to have larger amounts of payables, they can't necessarily keep up and provide the additional functionality needed. And the last would be finding an actual custom solution. So or building a custom solution on your own. Obviously, the advantages to something like this would be that it is going to meet your very specific needs, especially if you have, for instance, a very complicated PO matching process or something along those lines. Then a custom solution may work. Of course, the downside to something like that is cost, typically, as well as we can speak from experience here at MineralTree that syncing, while simple at its heart, is incredibly difficult. And so even to build a custom system that will sync everything correctly can be very difficult regardless of how much you're spending on that solution. So when considering, well, which direction should I go? I mean, maybe I already have a document storage solution, or maybe I already have integrated payables with my bank. You know, how do I go about kind of making the larger decision on how to address accounts payable in general? So I think the first question is, why should I change, or why would it be worth it to make a change? And certainly we'll cover all these things. Where should you look and where should you start? When does it even make sense? Obviously, people are very busy. There's a lot of other things going on. When does it make sense to focus on an AP improvement? Who should be involved in those decisions? How to make sure you're getting the best solution? And of course, you know, at the end of it all, what does your process look like? And what should it look like in an ideal situation? And one thing we certainly found is that every organization has a very different approach, different rules, different you know, processes that they've set up in the past, different structures of the organization. So how do you make sure that your overall process in the end looks like what you want it to look like and is ideal? So, you know, we like to think of, you know, AP automation as being on the right side of history. We certainly don't believe that in the next few years you're going to have a lot of people talking about how, you know, they hung on to manually processing paper invoices and cutting paper checks and things of that nature. You know, ultimately it's kind of going to go the way of the old light bulbs there. Efficiency, you know, having control and visibility of your outgoing cash flow, as well as security, is, you know, the main drivers. But one of the things that we hear most often is that the reason that people are starting to look at AP is because it's the last frontier in terms of really being able to show significant impact to efficiency and overall spend and things like that, because a lot of people have already tried to address things like, you know, accounts receivable and analysis and things of that nature. So there's a real opportunity here to move the needle when it comes to accounts payable. The second is, so where do I look to find the right solution? You know, certainly we would recommend that you always check with your accounting system partners. So certainly with GP, most people, or everyone for the most part, is working with a reseller, consultant, VAR of some sort. We highly recommend you speak with those, you know, providers. We work very closely with those people. So we're probably either working with your consultant now, or if we haven't, certainly, you know, with a lot of their colleagues. But we're always happy to, you know, start that conversation and engage with those consultants to ensure that it's a very smooth process for you. Also, you know, certainly references are, you know, something you'll always want to check in terms of, you know, and Ahmed's, you know, certainly helping us out today to provide some insights on how he was able to make his decision, but certainly checking with different references to see what the rollout actually was like and what improvements they actually saw is certainly critical to, you know, making the right decision and not just a quick one. So, you know, this is one of our favorite cartoons around the office in general in terms of, you know, obviously in accounting, it's either end of month, end of quarter, end of year, we're in budgeting, it's audits, tax season, et cetera. There is always some reason that it's, you know, not an ideal time. But the reality is anyone who's processing, you know, call it 100 invoices or payments, anyone who's a growing company that is looking for scalable infrastructure and is at a point where they either need to hire additional people or get some sort of automation in place, you know, that's where it tends to really make sense. And that's when it makes sense. Also, if you have dispersed environments, you know, multiple locations, certainly that's going to be a time to look at it. If you do have a complex ordering and approval process that is taking up a lot of time and energy and resources on regressive job functions, like keying in invoices and manually running invoices around the office for approvals, there is a better use of your people's time. So, you know, now is as good a time as any to do anything, but if you fall into any of these categories, that's when it really makes sense to take a closer look at this type of solution. You know, in terms of who should be involved in the process, It's important for a couple reasons that, obviously in a lot of cases the CFO may not be the person who is doing all the research on what solutions to use. But that being said, oftentimes they are the payment authorizer. They are that final person giving either a green light or saying or rejecting a payment. So it's very important that the solution be easy to use, and a lot of CFOs we talk to, for instance, will say, I like signing checks. I like having it in front of me. I like to see things on paper. So getting that person and getting their buy-in to show them that, this is going to be an easier process. This is going to allow you to be more mobile. This is going to give you better visibility to what you're approving and, greater controls. Those are all things you want to make sure you're getting buy-in through the CFO. From a controller perspective or director of finance, things like that, whoever is responsible for the operations as a whole, that tends to be the primary person running these types of products or projects, I should say. But certainly it's someone that should be very involved in this to ensure that all parties who are involved have visibility and understand how this will make their lives easier. For instance, when you think about the different department heads who may be approving invoices, things like that, you want to make sure that both the controller as well as those different department heads understand not just how to use the new product, but understand how it's going to make their life easier and better, again, to get people's buy-in so that when you're implementing a solution like this, you do have that buy-in and it does go smoothly. And then, of course, you want to make sure that your procurement team and accounting team, are on board, and they do see this as something that is going to make their lives easier. Obviously, any change is going to be a challenge, and you may even find some resistance from people who may be concerned that an automation solution may impact their livelihood or how much they're needed at an organization. But what we tend to find in the markets that we focus on, which is really the mid-market, is that it's not about cutting people for the most part. It's really more about letting them focus on more important things, regardless of what they mean, whether that's focusing more on AR or vendor relations or negotiating additional discounts, whatever it may be. That there are much better, more important things that they could be working on versus, again, things like keying in data into a system. So when you think about how a solution may fit into your process, there's all sorts of things that you really need to consider. So where does the purchase process actually begin? Does your organization have a PO requisition process? Is it happening at a department level, or are things being approved all through a central AP? And so you need to understand where that process begins so you can really highlight what you're trying to focus on. Is your organization open to new and best practices? One of the nice things and something to keep in mind in general is, there's the balance of, does it fit my current process? But also, am I willing to change some of my current process in order for this to work well and not be a huge challenge in terms of getting people on board with the solution? So for instance, with GP, I'm sure everyone's very familiar with the batch process, and many of our customers with GP prefer to have their invoices approved prior to actually entering them into GP. And so on the one hand, you want to make sure that a solution like MineralTree does allow you to do those things still, which of course we do. However, at certain points, if you really want to move the needle, there may be times when you do want to change the overall process, especially as time goes on. For instance, you may want to start sending all AP to a central AP versus to individuals, or of course you may want to keep it the same, but you want to make sure that whatever you're doing, it's in line with your organization. And that's also, what systems are already in place. You've got GP in place, but ultimately, what other types of solutions and process do you have in place? Can the solution that you're looking at relieve a lot of things? Can it handle all the different intricacies that you already have. So you want to make sure that it's fitting into anything you're already doing so that it's not going to essentially just create more work by replacing old work. Another big part is, and this is obviously one of the main benefits of a solution like MineralTree, is how do invoices get entered into the system? Anyone who's manually keying in invoices, certainly a solution like this, just in terms of entering invoices alone, is going to have a huge impact in terms of time spent processing the invoices. And you have the ability with a solution like ours to simply just email them in, and we will capture the data, create the invoice, send it for routing as well as coding, all automatically. So understanding how they get entered into the system, or how a new solution is going to do that for you, is very important. Also, when you think of how you're tracking and approving invoices, it's critical to have things like different levels that you can have, different hierarchies, to ensure that you're not sending things for approval to people that don't need to approve them, and vice versa, that you're sending things to people who don't have the authority to approve things, and then you have tight controls that fit in with your company and what you're aiming to do in terms of controlling your accounts payable. Also, how do you ensure that there is a segregation of duties, that no one person has the ability to both create a payment and approve it for themselves as well? And so having those controls is critical to making sure that it does fit in with your process, but doesn't create more work for you. And lastly, does it fit in with the different payment types that you do? So are you doing check, ACH, card, international wires? Making sure that it takes advantage or is able to keep up with all those different solutions in one place is critical. But also the question is, what other payment solutions could you be leveraging? So maybe you are using a lot of checks right now with a mix of ACH in there, but could you be leveraging, for instance, virtual card payments, which is something that we offer, where you actually earn rebates, thereby taking down the overall cost of an AP automation solution. So these are all things that really should be considered when making the choices and looking at different solutions, and not only how they'll help you, but how they'll fit in with what you're already doing. So when you're looking at your current process in terms of what does it look like and what should it look like, the big thing is keep it simple, right? What are the things that are consuming the most time, the most resources? Data entry is one that we see as a huge one. Managing exceptions and all sorts of, customer questions and things like that, and understanding where payments are, certainly take up a tremendous amount of time. A lot of times, honestly, we just hear that just chasing down the actual check signer can take a lot of time and effort, and they got to make sure the person's in the office or they're going to miss them. So, how much time is that taking? The idea of printing out voucher packets is much more prevalent than most people may realize, that a lot of people are still printing out all the associated documentation, printing out the checks for signature, and not only is that killing a lot of trees, but it does take up quite a bit of time. So obviously that's something with an automated solution that you no longer would have. Also, the printing, correlating, stuffing, stamping, mailing of checks and things like that, it can be a huge time suck. Also, when you think about filing all the papers, if you have it in an automated system, you still may want to keep some of those paper records, but you certainly don't have to organize them and file them the way you would if you were fully dependent on it. Things like following up with an automated solution, you're going to have remittance sent automatically with each payment. So not only do people know that they're being paid and that a payment has been sent, but also they know exactly what they're being paid for. So for instance, a lot of organizations may not realize that when they make an ACH payment, the person who's receiving it doesn't necessarily have visibility into what they're getting paid for. So even though they got paid, they're still calling to say, what was that for, and to get information. So not only is it going to save you time in terms of the actual making payments, but just in terms of responding to your vendors in terms of where payments are at. The last thing, and certainly we don't want to focus too much on scaring people, but in terms of security and protecting yourself against fraud, it's incredibly important to understand how well you're protected from your bank's perspective. So for instance, a lot of people are do not realize that Regulation E, which is something that protects consumers against fraud in their accounts, is not something that covers business bank accounts. So there's a lot more liability in terms of, if there was to be an issue with fraud in your system versus if you were a consumer. And a lot of people aren't aware of that. So there's a lot of different steps that you take with an automation solution. First of all, everything is being tracked electronically, which in itself helps from a security perspective. But things like dual factor authentication, for payment approvers, meaning that there's two different ways that they have to sign in to actually execute a payment, ensures that checks aren't, mysteriously disappearing from the checkbook, and that it is ultra secure in terms of the way you're protecting your outgoing payments. Also, we do provide a $100,000 guarantee against online fraud, which is not necessarily offered by all automation solutions, but is something certainly to keep in mind when you're looking for a solution. So just to kind of summarize and kind of to a high-level list of things to look for, in a solution, you want someone who is ideally exclusively focused on accounts payable, on this process. Again, there are, not to say they never make sense, but a document management solution, just a true bill pay, those can have their value, but when you're really trying to automate the AP process end to end, it's important that you have a company that is focused on that in particular and is not trying to also shoehorn some sort of other solution. For instance, you don't necessarily want an expense solution that has now been slightly tweaked to turn it into an accounts payable solution. There are a lot of different things that are particular to accounts payable that aren't necessarily the case for things like handling just expenses. If you're looking for something that's complete, again, you want to figure out where does your process start and where does it end, and you want one solution for that because you've already got an accounting system, you've probably got all sorts of other solutions. The last thing you want is multiple additional things for people to have to log into and learn and understand. So it's critical to find something that's truly complete. Something that can provide clear savings to you. Let's be frank, if you're going to automate accounts payable, you're typically doing it so that you can show the organization that there is clear savings, that it is a net savings for you. And that's something we actually provide if you're looking for a cost of ownership and savings analysis. We can work out that for each individual company. Again, we talked about security is ultra critical. I mean, this is your accounts payable. This is, very important to your business. So making sure that it's secure and has things like dual factor authentication, segregation of duties, payment limits and permissions is absolutely critical. Integration and ease of use of a solution. Certainly, I hope when you see Andrew go through the demo, you'll see the ease of use. But the term integration is often abused. There is a very clear difference between file transfers versus a true API and integrating with a solution. MineralTree is a two-way real-time integration, and so you don't have to be concerned about things like syncing, and your GP will always remain the system of record, but there is a true integration. Cloud readiness, is it ready, even though GP may be on-prem, does it have the ability to get up and running quickly and easily? The payment execution itself, again, you do see some solutions out there that take you to the payment but don't actually execute it and push it back to your system, so you want to make sure it does cover that as well. And last but certainly not least is scalability. As you grow, as your payments continue to grow, does the solution have the ability to actually scale with you and handle if you go from hundreds to thousands of payments? So just to kind of wrap it up before we move on, when you work with MineralTree, you take out a lot of the inefficiency, the manual ad hoc process from invoice capture. You know, these numbers that you see here in terms of what it costs to process an invoice and per payment. These are backed by, you know, a handful of different third-party research, as well as what we've heard from our own customers and prospects. But you know, you take out this very ad hoc, inefficient, paper-based process from invoice capture to payment execution, and you simply replace it with a much cleaner version that is automatically extracting data, posting it back to your accounting system. It's automated in terms of approval and coding as much as possible. And again, it's syncing back with your accounting system after the payments are executed. And so just as a very brief example, you know, what the savings look like, and again, we can run an individual analysis for anyone who's interested, but, you know, a company that's doing somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 payments or 3,000 invoices a year, you know, would be looking at a saving somewhere around $22,000 when you add up both improvements in efficiency, the ability to capture more early pay discounts, outsourcing the actual payments themselves where we're actually handling that for you, as well as rebates that can be earned through electronic payments. Okay. And now I will turn it over to Ahmed.
Thanks, Michael. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ahmed Nagy, and I am the Financial Controller for the Hollywood Wax Museum Group. We are, as you can tell from the name, in the wax museum business, family attractions, self-storage, and real estate. We're in all of these businesses. We have about 14, 15 companies altogether, and 11 of them are implemented through MineralTree AP automation system. Our first location opened in 1965, and we have wax museum featuring replicas of celebrities. We have 4 wax museum locations in 4 different cities: Hollywood, California, in Los Angeles, Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and Branson, Missouri. And our self-storage facilities are in Thousand Oaks, California, and we own real estate in all of these cities. Looking at the size of the companies and the size of our AP, we knew we needed to do something in order for us to not have 10 people on staff just doing AP all day long. AP automation made sense, but it was a challenge in the beginning to find the right solution, and I will go over that. We went from QuickBooks to GP, which was a huge jump. We wanted to be able to do things with the data, and our search for a software solution to automate AP resulted in us finding a solution called Fidesic by Enliven Software. And it was great in the beginning, and then we started learning very quickly what we were missing or what to look for. AP automation was very new to us, so we didn't really know what to look for, and I think this WebEx is great. Michael went over some really critical points that I wish we knew when we were looking for a solution back then. We process over 1,000 payments per month across all of our locations, and it was just very critical. And believe it or not, we have 1 AP person on staff. We do not have more than 1 employee working in AP. We knew that there are benefits, and we wanted to fully utilize it. But once we implemented in Livin, we had a lot of issues with customer support. We quickly found out that checks were not the best way to go, and the ACH capabilities were very, very limited. The integration process was very costly, and it did not have LiveSync. And what we've learned also is, as advanced the OCR technology is, a set of human eyes is crucial for this process to be fluent. What we decided that we needed for a solution to work for us is we wanted to make sure that it's easy to use by our accounts payable and by our approvers and our general managers coding the invoices across all of our cities. We wanted to make sure that to implement a solution, it's not going to cost us thousands of dollars between the solution itself and our GP consultants having to write code and get things in to where we can do it ourselves and not having to go to our consultants every time we're trying to get a batch in. We wanted to make sure that there's visual confirmation. We wanted a set of human eyes looking at our invoices. We have hundreds of vendors, hundreds of invoice templates, and OCR technologies are not great at capturing like maybe handwritten invoices or just different templates that are from different countries. We deal with a lot of vendors all over the world, and we just wanted to make sure that somebody's actually looking at the data to make sure that OCR is picking it and putting it in the right place. We want it to have great customer support. When things go wrong with AP automation, you want to be able to reach out to somebody and get their support, get them on a situation, whether it's a pending payment, whether it's duplicate payment, whatever the case is. We wanted to make sure that we are covered. We wanted ACH capabilities. We're trying to migrate to ACH. We wanted flexibility. We wanted somebody who's able to work with, with our local banks in all the different cities and with our bigger nationwide banks. We wanted to have ability to send wires, just explore all the other different payment options out there. Once we decided, or we knew what we wanted, we did an extensive online search, which landed us on MineralTree along with a couple of other solutions. We contacted our consultants for recommendations. Didn't really get us too much options because most consultants have one or two AP automation people they work with, and unfortunately, MineralTree did not work with our consultants at the time. We came across a solution from Rico, and we implemented that solution. It was a very painful process, very costly. Took us months to implement, and during our first week in live in production with that solution, it just did not work for us. It was very, very complicated. It was built for an engineering firm. It was not really built for us. Our AP had a hard time using it. Our approvals had a hard time, and it did not process payments. So after all what we've been through, we came to find out that payment execution was not the true definition we were accustomed to. And then we went back, did more research, and we discovered MineralTree finally. After our first call with MineralTree, we were very impressed by the true active sync and the implementation time. Literally, you can implement MineralTree in a few hours. We did not need to pay our consultants to do anything to integrate MineralTree. It was done strictly between their IT and our IT. It literally took 2 hours. The two-way real-time sync works great. Once an invoice is approved, you can see it in GP. Once payments are issued, you can see them in GP. What a lot of people don't understand is, with a lot of the other solutions, to be able to code into that solution, you need to provide a vendor list, an Excel format or Word format. You need to, to provide your chart of accounts. All these are things that are uploaded with the solution. So if you make any changes to your vendor list, if you make any changes to your chart of accounts, you lose that structure. You need to now export, send back to them, have them uploaded so you're able to code properly. having ActiveSync, they're directly looking into your chart of accounts. So any changes you made or you make are updated instantly. Any vendors you add, they show up instantly. And you can just choose them, code them, send it out for approval, and just makes it a lot more efficient. The fraud protection is huge. Believe it or not, there's a lot of AP solutions out there that will duplicate your payment. You could send a $100,000 payables batch, and it will go out as 2 checks for each vendor. A lot of the vendors are not honest, and they will just cash the checks. And the process of having to trace these payments and bring them back or try to get credits is just a painful process. We wanted to make sure that A, we're going to secure solution with the authentication. We wanted to make sure that we're insured if anything like that were to happen. We wanted to make sure that that solution is responsible and will take responsibility in resolving these issues. We're pretty busy as it is, and having to deal with a situation like this is pretty brutal. And the fact that MineralTree offered authentication and the insurance gave us peace of mind. We were very happy with the accuracy, having those human eyes in these invoices just to make sure that, you know, the invoice number is going where the invoice number needs to go. The vendor names are pulling correctly in GP. You want to make sure that, you know, if you want to make sure you're not double paying invoices and duplicating invoices in GP, you want to make sure that you're capturing the right invoice number in the right place. The user experience was amazing. Our AP person loves it. Our approvals love it. It's super easy to use, as Andrew will show you guys a little bit later. Customer support was beyond our expectation, you know, throughout implementation, training, bugs, throughout, you know, even when we reach out and be like, hey, we really think this could work for us if you can maybe consider developing or implementing this into your solution to work better for us and it will help other people. They're fully supportive of everything we ask for. If you have multiple locations or multiple companies, a lot of the solutions out there, it's really painful. You have to log in and out for each company. Having a solution that would list all of your locations or all of your entities is very, very important. We wanted the ACH capabilities regardless of the location of the bank, and MineralTree did a great job in implementing that. That's pretty much it. I hope I gave you guys a quick idea on what to look for, and hopefully our experience will help you pick the right solution. I will now turn it over to Andrew for a quick demo.
Great. Thank you, Ahmed. Go ahead and share my screen here. All right, so everyone should be looking at the MineralTree login page right now. I'm going to give a succinct overview of the solution, taking you from invoice capture, coding, and approval, all the way through to payment approval and execution, hitting on a lot of the elements that both Mike and Ahmed have talked about already. A couple quick words as I'm logging in here. The application is actually divided into 2 modules because of our commitment to segregation of duties. The first is the accounting manager application that I'm jumping into right now. This is where invoices are captured, coded, and routed for approval. And it's then in the payment authorization application that someone like the CFO or controller can review payment information and sign off on them before they go out. So keep that in mind as we move through here. We'll hit on both sides of the process. Here on the dashboard of the accounting manager, just a couple things I'll point out. First, in the top right, a lot has been made by Mike and then Ahmed about our sync with Microsoft Dynamics GP. And indeed, here in the right, I can see that we're currently connected to our GP company. That means that our two-way sync is currently working in real time to push data back and forth between MineralTree and GP. And this essentially is designed to give you the peace of mind that anything you enter in MineralTree will come back into GP, and anything you might change or create in GP, a vendor, an invoice, an account, will sync over to MineralTree where it can be used there. And up here on the left, I have my general ledger cache. This is an example of something that we sync over from GP on a continuous basis. So I can view that here. Below my account information, I have a standard aging graphic, which just gives me a sense of the urgency of my open bills, my outstanding payables. And I can drill down under any of these categories to take a look at the relevant invoices, or I can pop over to the invoices page where I can take a look at all of my open bills. This is where accounting managers spend most of their time. It's here that they see line by line, vendor by vendor, their open bills. It's where they can manage approvals and invoice details. I can see here just in line some basic stats, the vendor, the amount, the due date, as well as things like the invoice approval status. We'll get to that a little more in a second, and whether a document has been attached to this invoice and is associated with it. So because of our two-way sync, you can always post a batch in GP and it'll go over into MineralTree to be paid and approved. But more than likely, you'll want to take advantage of our automated data capture capabilities. And the way that this works is that customers send us an original image of an invoice, either by uploading it directly from within MineralTree or by emailing it into the system. In fact, your vendors themselves can actually email things right in as well. And however that's coming in, we'll be able to take that original invoice and extract information such as the vendor name, the invoice number, dates, amounts from that invoice. You'll see here an example on the left where we've pulled these fields, and notice that they come from both the summary level, I have the total amount here, and also the line item level. If I scroll down, I can see that a line item has been created for every line item on the original invoice. Even for fields such as the AP account and the GL account that aren't visible on the original invoice, those have still populated here because of a default I've set at the vendor level. So I've created a default GL account for this vendor so that when the invoices come in, it's actually already completely coded for me. And it's just a matter of reviewing the information, changing or updating any coding as I see fit. If I open this up, I'll see all my accounts from GP are displaying in MineralTree and are available for selection. So as the accounting manager, all that remains for me to do is review this information, and then I have the option to route this for invoice approval. And I can do that simply by entering in the name or email address of my approver down below. I'll add myself here. And you'll notice this draft status here and this post to GP option. So right now the invoice has been captured. It exists in MineralTree, but it hasn't actually been moved back into GP yet. And obviously the reason we maintain this is to allow you to approve invoices before they get posted back to GP. So you'll have the option to make changes in those invoices. Obviously once something's posted in GP, it's difficult to make edits. So I can go ahead and carry out my approval process and then come in later and post it to GP. But I'll generate this invoice approval request by hitting save here. Now I can always come into an invoice and route it for approval, sort of an ad hoc basis like that. But I can also streamline the process a little bit by setting up a default invoice approver for this vendor. So if I click on this vendor card, I'll see the information on the left, the details that are coming over from GP, as well as a space for me to add that remittance information for the vendor so they'll be notified when payments go out to them. And then on the right, I have some preferences. I have a default account I'm paying them from. We allow you to bring as many as you want into MineralTree. And I also have a default payment type. It's set to check right now, but I could choose to use ACH, for example, for this vendor by default. And then finally, if I scroll down in the top right, I'll see both those preferences I mentioned before, the default accounts for this vendor that are causing those fields to auto-populate on the invoices screen. And there's also a space for me to add someone as a default invoice approver. Now if I add my name here, I'll automatically receive an approval request every time that an invoice from this vendor is captured. Invoice approvers receive these requests via email. They have the option to approve right from a link in the email, or they can also log in and dig in a little deeper, view all their outstanding invoice approval requests, manage how often they want to get notification, things like that. So we've got workflows built in for those occasional invoice approvers who maybe get an email once in a while, and maybe someone like a department head who's managing a lot of invoice approvals, they'll have a tool to go in and take care of those in batches in bulk. I can see here from the Accounting Manager application the status of my outstanding requests. I've got 2 in red here that were rejected by an invoice approver, 2 in green that have been approved, and 2 in yellow that are still pending. So when I've gone through this process, however I've defined it, and I'm ready to make some payments, I can submit them for final authorization by just hitting pay here on the right. I'll add a couple of them to the queue. And once they're in there, I'll have a couple choices. I can edit the amount if I want to make a partial payment against this invoice. And I also have the ability to set a payment date. So I can choose when this payment's going to go out, and this drop-down will show me what the due date is for this invoice. As soon as possible, which for checks means they go out first class the next day. For electronic payments, we'll send them off for processing the same evening. So let me go ahead and submit these two payments for final authorization. I can double check the account they're being paid from and also choose a payment type. Right now these are just set to check, but we also handle ACH and can do virtual card payments as well. So after I submit these, my work as the accounting manager is going to be finished, and it's up to another user, usually the CFO or the controller, the person who is signing the checks in a more traditional setup often. They're going to have the ability to log in and review all the information before these payments are actually released. So let me log into my company as my payment approver user. Putting my credentials in has triggered this two-factor code, and I'm going to have to enter this 6-digit number, which was just texted to my phone, before I can get into the application. This is optional, but highly recommended as an extra layer of protection against any kind of fraud in your account. After I log in, I'll be presented with a similar layout, the same account information as the accounting managers, but instead of the aging graphic, I now have this wheel, which is just showing me everything that requires my attention. Right now I have 2 payments awaiting approval and none that are on hold or approved and scheduled to go out. So let's drill down and take a look at these 2 payments we just sent over. Here in line, I'm going to be able to see some basic information. If this is enough to make a decision, I can go ahead and approve right here. I can even approve the whole batch in one click, but also have access to the same level of information that invoice approvers and accounting managers had throughout the process. So if I click on the vendor here, I can drill down into this payment, take a look at the information on it, as well as a history of recent payments to this vendor for comparison. As I scroll down, I can see any notes that were added by other users in the system, and I can take a look at the invoice details, including the status of the invoice approval request. I can see that this was approved and by whom. And then finally at the bottom, I can take a look at the accounts that the line items are coded to, and even bring up an image of the original document if I want to review that as well before I let this payment go. If everything looks in order, I can go ahead and approve this payment. If I see some kind of an issue, I can reject it. This will prompt me to give an explanation as to why. Perhaps it wasn't coded properly, and the accounting manager will be alerted and will have to fix what was wrong and resubmit it to me. Again, maintaining this segregation of duties to make sure that no payments are going out without getting looked at a couple times. When I'm all set, I'll just go through this final confirmation step, and after a look into my general ledger cache, I can submit these payments. And my work as the approver is finished. We take all the work out of the process in terms of printing and signing checks. We'll execute the payments for you after they're approved. As I mentioned, for checks, they are printed and mailed first class the next day. These checks have your signature, your microline on them, so they'll function just like any other checks you might cut. And no money will be taken from your account until the vendor deposits that check. There's no sort of settlement or intermediary account involved in the process. It's about connecting your bank account and enabling you to make payments to your vendors directly from it. It's a similar story with electronic payments. For ACH, we'll be generating the payment file and sending it off the same night for processing. And again, that payment's going to go off to the vendor. Your account will be debited, theirs will be credited. No settlement account, no holding account in the middle there. In both cases, we'll also send out remittance information to vendors via email. As Mike mentioned, this is especially relevant for ACH payments where the vendor's just getting this ACH credit in their bank account, they need to know what invoices were being paid, why they're being paid. The remittance takes care of that automatically. And of course, at this point in the process, these payments are going to sync back into GP itself. So we're closing the loop data-wise in terms of the AP process. You can run your AP process within MineralTree, but GP remains your system of record. All the information will be in there. And then finally, just a couple security features I'll mention here at the end. We've seen the two-factor code in action there. You saw me put in that to get into the system. Those are available for use in a couple places in the application. And then we also offer, as Ahmed and Mike have mentioned, that $100,000 guarantee against any fraud on your account. And the reason we're able to offer that is because of things like the two-factor code and the segregation of duties that make the process inherently much more secure than a traditional paper-based process. So that sums up your basic MineralTree workflow. We're a little tight on time here, but I'll go ahead and turn it over to some questions, and we can answer a couple before the session ends here.
Great, thanks, Andrew. Looks like we do actually have a bunch of questions that came through. So the first question is, how does this work if we need to enter match invoices to receiving both material invoices and freight invoices?
Sure. So when something like a three-way match, a PO match is involved, typically we utilize the workflow within GP for those purchase orders and receipt of those purchase orders. GP has that built-in workflow, and thanks to our two-way sync, when an invoice is created in GP, when a PO is flipped into a vendor bill, those will sync to MineralTree automatically, and then they can go through the payment process.
Okay, here's another question. Hi, nice presentation and good product. Is it possible to apply payments to specific lines in an invoice and register to Dynamics GP, parentheses, having proper control of due amounts?
Yeah, so in terms of paying just specific line items, we saw how you can make partial payments. If you wanted to just sort of pay a couple different line items on an invoice, I'd probably recommend splitting the invoice in MineralTree. You have the ability to, add and delete line items there. So I would break it up that way and make it clear to the vendor that it's just those two line items being paid.
Okay, another question. Can you set up multiple default approval levels? For example, one specific approver if an invoice is less than 10,000, but two approvers required if it's greater than 10,000?
Yes, we do have the ability to set up a hierarchy on invoice approval. You can set the dollar limits and have those sequential approvals.
Okay, another question. Is there a drill down to invoice image in GP?
We do not currently sync the documents back into GP. They live within MineralTree, and we store an unlimited number of them, and all users can have access to look at them.
This is kind of along the same question, but I'll ask it. Where are the invoice images stored? GP puts them in the SQL database. Would they reside in the same place?
So they are stored within our system. If for whatever reason someone ever needs those documents, we're able to send that file to them. Also, the request for a solution or the ability to access those documents from the system themselves is one we've heard quite a bit and is on the relatively near-term roadmap.
Do you offer PO processing and invoice matching?
So I think we hit on this earlier. We leverage GP's capabilities around POs and receipt, and then process the payments on those invoices.
Another question just came in. Is the solution sold in a modular basis? For example, could a client use the OCR and approval process, then send the documents to GP for payment processing?
It's certainly technically feasible. It would be unprecedented, and Mike can speak to this maybe a little more, but you know, we bundle it as one product, and typically folks, you know, once they're using the approval and invoice capture process as an actual extension to, you know, have us also be cutting those payments for them, and you know, getting that level of security, and also not having to worry about printing and sending out those checks themselves.
Yeah, and certainly that's something, you know, we can discuss it in more detail, you know, offline in terms of, you know, how this would all work, and how, you know, answer some questions around how this may fit with kind of what they're asking for there.
Okay, is this accessible for NAV?
No, we currently only support Dynamics GP, I'm afraid.
Another question, can the invoices be coded to GP's analytical accounting module?
This is a question that comes up a couple of times, I guess a month, I'd say, from our customers. We don't currently support the AA module. It's something we are looking at supporting in the future, since it's come up several times. Right now, we have a couple customers that, you know, do the capture through us, and then you know, apply that coding within GP.
Okay, let's see if any more questions come in. Just give people another minute or so to collect their thoughts. Once again, the Q&A tab is on the right-hand side of your screen, so if you've got any questions, please feel free to type them in. Mike and Andrew, do you have your contact information up that people can see in case they want to send you questions offline? If not, maybe you can just give people your email.
We don't have it up, but we'll actually send all that within the follow-up email with the recording.
Perfect. Okay. All right. Well, it looks like we don't have any more questions, so why don't we end there? I'd like to first thank the presenters, Mike, Andrew, and Ahmed. That was an excellent presentation. It was very informative, and I'd like to thank the attendees for taking time out of your busy day to join us. I hope you found the session to be informative. As Mike said, he'll be sending a follow-up email with his email, so if you have any questions offline for Mike or Andrew, feel free to get in touch with them. Once again, thanks everybody, and have a great rest of the day.